Yeah.
All right. So you're coming into your second full year as president of the University of Iowa. How would you say you've taken the UI from great to greater, as you'd said you wanted to in 2015, and what work still needs to be done to make the UI greater?
Well, I think it's definitely a work in progress. But I think I think one of the things I'm really proud of is that we're actually having the right discussions. I think we've embraced the reality of what's happened over the last decade in terms of academic performance, support systems for undergraduate and graduate students, and we see that we have some opportunities. The big issue in front of us right now, which I'm sure we'll get to, is the issue of fiscal support and how we improve in a number of really critical areas. So it's still a work in progress, but I'm really pleased that the community is embracing the reality of where we are and having serious, frank conversations about how to improve.
Okay, so jumping to the next question. You've spoken to us before in the past about travel ban and how that might affect University of Iowa students and what UI would do in response to that. But this morning with the announcement to end the DACA program, what do you see happening and what programs might students who might be affected
I understand the comparison, but to the travel bans, because there were really two. And in that particular case, we could specifically identify members of the community who were impacted by the two different travel bans. This is a little bit different in the sense that we don't have any data as to who and how many are impacted. On the other hand, and it also will impact us, I think, in different ways. It won't impact us at all in admissions because we don't use any of that data or information in the admission process. On the other hand, clearly there are members of our community that could well be impacted by this. And so part of what we're trying to do is just get out the word to anybody who's individually or family or friends may be impacted, to let us know. And we have a lot of different support systems here on campus. And we actually have a Hawkeye Dreamers team that's prepared to do anything necessary to help those impacted. I think the second thing to make it pretty clear is, which I've done and we've done over the last year, is we don't think this is a good thing to do. I've expressed my concern directly to the administration through various letters. I think there will be another one going out because I haven't read the details of what happened this morning, but I sense there is a suspension for a period of time, and in a sense trying to get the Congress to deal with it. So I suspect we'll be writing a letter to the leaders in Congress and letting them know where we stand on this. So it's a little different than what happened with the travel ban, and so anybody who has any specific needs, come see us. We're here to help.
Thank you.
Sure.
So the UI announced the decision to close the DITV full-time MBA program recently. I think alumni have expressed concerns about the logic of that led to that program's closure, potentially leading to the closure of other programs. Is there any potential that could happen, and are there any concerns on the university's behalf about the loss of the cultural value of the program and what that means?
Well, we aren't the only ones. I think it's been, I used to actually teach in that type of full-time MBA program at another institution. And I think many institutions are taking a look at a shift in what I would call the channel of how one gets an MBA. It's fascinating to me at this point in time, our MBA enrollment in total is over 1,100 students, and it's at an all-time high. But what's happening is more and more students are trying to get their MBA while also working. And so they're looking for night times, weekends, cohorts coming together for several months, and then going back to work. So the channels are changing, as I call it. And the full-time MBA, Wake Forest and several other institutions have also closed theirs down. It's been more demand related. So as the demand has shifted to other MBA programs, we're finding our need to do the same thing. And we actually think we can take the resources that's been going to full-time MBA, put it up against the other programs that are increasing in demand, and do a better job there. I think we have no plans currently to shift anything else out of MBA, but I will say we're continually looking at every channel for all degrees, trying to make sure they make sense and that they close economically, particularly during this difficult fiscal period. I'm sure we'll talk about tuition and resources and all the rest here in a minute. It would be imprudent if we weren't asking these sort of questions.
Well, read my mind with next question.
What was your next question, just for fun?
Leading into tuition task force
Okay.
discussion.
I don't think we did this. I just want to be very clear. I don't think we did the MBA closure. We did not do it for fiscal reasons. It was really a shift in the demand. On the other hand, now that we've decided it, we can repurpose that money to other places where there's higher demand. And I think if we didn't do these sort of things, as I said, people would be critical of us for not using our money expeditiously. So, resources, tuition.
So with those tuition task force meetings this summer, it's opened up the discussion about the value of a University of Iowa degree and that in relation to higher education funding. So what would you say right now is the value of a University of Iowa degree, and if this plan were to be implemented, what do you envision that value being in 2022?
Give me a moment, because I think this is a pretty important question, and I think it's nuanced. And I'm finding that we don't like nuanced, complicated issues in today's society, but some of them are. I think this is one of them. I'm pretty concerned that the way in which we're talking about it has been devolving to 7% tuition increase over 5 years. Let's back all the way up. To your point about the value, people who came to us a decade ago have seen during this past decade that in U.S. News and World Report or AAU or other ranking systems, the value of that brand drop pretty significantly. And I'm concerned that that will continue unless we do some things differently. And that's where this all begins. We have a choice about what quality we want, how our brand stacks up to other brands, how our graduation rates in 4 years or 6 years, or the salaries 5 years or 10 years out stack up relative to other institutions. And this process begins for me with a hard look at our peers. And we benchmark against several Big Ten institutions, not all the Big Ten, plus we add in North Carolina and Arizona and Texas and UCLA. And that's our peer group. And any way we look at the data, we've fallen in this last decade. Then we've asked ourselves, how would we regain? And that's the basis of the strategic plan that was approved last year about this time. And if you poke underneath that, you'll see that the needs fall into 3 big buckets. One is student outcomes and how we improve the graduation rates, the application rates to graduate school or to jobs, et cetera. And the next bucket is research. And the third bucket is engagement with the state. And in all 3 areas, we have identified very specific activities that we are not doing enough in. And I think we now have a clear idea of how to improve, and if we were given resources and the permission to go ahead. If not, then I think it's a choice, and that's fine, but the consequences would be more of the same. And that's what really concerns me, because it would be, to your question, a continued diminution in the value. And I think that's not good. That's not good enough. I will also say that what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years, on purpose, we have continued to shift our student body towards more and more first-generation students. We had, I think, 20% 3 years ago. 2 years ago it was 23%. I think when the data comes here in the next few days on this current class, it's going to be like 24, 25% first-generation students. I think we all know that if we're going to continue that, and I think we should, it requires support for the individual students. So that's expensive, and we can do better than we currently are That then gets us, sorry for the long answer, that gets us into a plan that we benchmark relative to our other institutions, what they do in these areas. And we see a gap of about $150 to $165 million, not per year, over that entire 5-year period. And we said, okay, now where does that money come from? Where would it come from? And I think simply put, it could come from 3 areas. One is by remixing expenses and how we currently use monies that are being spent on campus. We've looked at, and I think this is one of the pieces that kind of it frustrates me, because I stood up a couple of weeks ago and said $11 to $12 million every year. In other words, 55 to some $60 million will come out of remixing our own expenses to go against these 3 areas that we've identified strategically. That's about 35% of it. So remixing of what we're doing to make sure we're not using anything or as few dollars as possible outside of those 3 strategically critical areas will pick up about 35% of it. The next 2 then become tuition or state appropriations. And we have immediately jumped into saying the state won't give us any money, which would then require a 7% increase in tuition over the next 5 years. Well, that's choice 2, because the state could actually pick up remember I said 150 to 165, and I said 35% of that will come from internal remixing. So let's just say the balance is $100 million. If the state gave us $20 million more per year each year, the state could pay for it with 0% tuition. And so now there's a sort of an ISO line on a graph. If you have tuition over here and you have state appropriations over here, one point is 0% tuition increases for the next 5 years and $20 million a year from the state. Another place is 7% increase and nothing from the state. And there's everything in between. And I'm finding it very interesting that Iowans are jumping over the discussion of what quality of institution we should have. Iowans are jumping over the remixing of expenses that we are trying to put up against this. Iowans are jumping over the state legislature's ability to help finance some of this and just jumping completely into 7% and say it's too much. Well, there's a lot of other things along the path there, and I think we should discuss them all. And if we don't get that, then there will be consequences. Just as in the last 10 years, benchmarked against these peer sets, we've fallen. And I'm nervous. I'm not going to lead an institution going towards mediocrity. We are better than that. We know it. We know how to do it. And so I just want to have the dialogue. Give us the chance.
Students have already expressed concerns about the current tuition rate preventing them from finding their next meal and things like that, regardless of the discussion of additional increases. I recognize that some of the money gained would go toward helping certain student populations through financial aid, but not everyone will have access to that aid. So we're at the point where students are being priced out of the University of Iowa education. So what is the University of Iowa's priority then? Is it to remain affordable and accessible, or is it to be competitive with these peer institutions?
Well, I don't want to answer a question by asking a question, but embedded in what you just said, where do you think we stand as Iowans relative to household income in the other states that are in our peer group? Illinois, Minnesota, Arizona, California. I mean, so there's an impression that somehow we are worse off than people in some of those other states. Our household income is the 3rd from the top. North Carolina has the lowest household income relative to our school. Second implication in your question is, where's our tuition today? Is it, when we say pricing out, well, after 5 years of 7% increases, we will still not be to the average of our peer group. So think about that. 7 years and 5 years of 7% a year, compounded, we will still be less than the average of our peer group in terms of tuition. So I understand it's hard. I understand we don't like it. But right now, we're at the rock bottom. And we're at the rock bottom also in state appropriations. Just to give you a interesting discussion point, the University of North Carolina, which has a household income much lower than Iowa. It's a bigger state, but in terms of averages, their household income's lower. They get $248 million a year more. We get $216 a year from the state of Iowa. They get $248 million more, okay? With a student body of 28,000, and we have a student body of 33,000. And they get $18 million more per year per tuition, through tuition, than we do. So I just don't think we're pricing ourselves as much out of the market as you might have been suggesting in your question. I think we'll do just fine. We had over 30,000 applications this year. And if we ended up with 28,000, I think we could still get a student body of 5,000, 5,100. So I don't think we're pricing ourselves as much out of the market. Now then, I think you're raising a couple of very important points. One is that we also will need to take up student financial aid. And we are committed that as we take, and so part of this discussion is all about the gross tuition level. None of you pay gross tuition. On average, our tuitions are 30% lower than the gross tuition. I don't know if anybody knows that. It's 29.6 is that the last time I looked at it. So everyone here is getting almost 30% on average. Secondly, as we take tuition up, we're going to have to also take that up to support students that will need it. So this notion that some will not, anybody who has a fiscal problem should come see us. There are a lot of different mechanisms. That some of them will be eligible for merit scholarships. Some of them will be eligible for our own fiscal need-based scholarships. Some will actually loans. Some of them are federal. So there's a whole set of tools we have. I don't think we're going to price anyone out. Then I finally say there's two ways. When I used to teach in the MBA program, I said there's two ways you can price yourself out of the market. One is you get your prices too high. We're a long way from that. I already covered that. Secondly, is you get your prices so low that the quality goes so low that the market is expecting something that you can't deliver. That's where we're going towards that. I think we're pricing ourselves in the market on the downside because we can't offer the support systems. Particularly when we've gone from 20 to 23 to 25% of first generation students, and we doggone well know they need more support, particularly in the first year and a half. And if we can know how to provide it, yet we can't afford to provide it, that 25 maybe need to be back to 20, and that's wrong. That's not who we are. So we're committed to that. And if we had more student dorms, residence halls, we would, because it makes the academics go up, campus safety goes up. Yet that, we could probably pop 2 or 3 more catlets if we had the resources, and students would be better off and better support mechanisms. So we're kind of hamstrung, and I think probably pricing ourselves out of the market on the downside. So it's got a lot of work to do here, but I think we know how to do it.
So if we're trying to remain competitive with these peer institutions and move our tuition to the median of those groups, why does the University of Iowa continue to use its low cost relative to those peer groups as a selling point to prospective students?
Do we? Do we also use quality? Those two things go hand in hand. I don't think I don't think our selling proposition is we're just cheap. I think our selling proposition is we know how to be good and are going to improve your lives long term. And that's a balance. And what we tend to do in these conversations is pull one element of that out and have a conversation about it. You need to understand it all comes together. If you don't like the peer group, let's change the peer group. Let's don't be in the big leagues. Let's don't be up against Michigan, UCLA, and Arizona. We can pick your regional school. We can benchmark against a different set. But that's a choice. That's back to where we started this whole conversation a few minutes ago. We have a set of choices. Who do we want to be? Who do we want to aspire to? And I think this institution has a long history of aspiring to be the best of the best. And I think Iowans deserve an institution in their state where they can go at state tuitions and be really, really world class. Question is, how do we sustain that? And I don't think it's just that we say, well, we're cheap. And if it's really cheap that you're after, there are wonderful other institutions all over the place that are cheaper than we are still. And community colleges are cheaper. I think there's something on the quality and the price. And that's a dynamic I think we've lost perspective on.
I'm sure you're aware, Rachel Zuckerman, she emailed the tuition task force to advocate for the institutions to be more transparent in their messaging about where they hope tuition stands, like years down the line. What is your response to that? So students.
Well, we put out I think she's right. I agree with Rachel. I think transparency on almost at any level helps us in a lot of different ways. But particularly as it relates to tuition, I think predictable tuition out over several years is a really, really important issue. So I talked particularly to students and parents about tuition increases. What they're really frustrated with is like they get surprised in the middle of the year that the state deappropriates us and then we have to put a tuition increase in. It's like, whoops. So we need to get out of that mode. That was the attempt at putting together a 5-year view of what this might look like. And I think I would really welcome the state to actually put out a 5-year view of state appropriations and stick to it. That would then allow us to talk about the balance on tuition. We put out a 5-year view of how we're going to take costs out and reposition them to meet this strategic plan. We've done the same thing on tuition. I think most of us are kind of worried about what the state will do, because right now they're in a year-by-year sort of mode. And in the last several years, it's been whatever we put in forward, they've taken out. They took $16 million last year. I think I'd have to go back and check the numbers, but I think we took our tuition up about 12 or 13 or 14. That's not 16. It's a little less. So they deappropriated us more than we took tuition up. That's not this year-by-year process. So I'm committed to putting 5-year plans in place on the tuition side, on the cost takeout side. But the big uncertainty is what the state's going to do year by year. The state's taken out about, from this institution, about $200 million over the last 10 years or so. Probably a similar amount or more at the other two state institutions, UNI and UI. So let's just say that's maybe $400 million or more. That's a hard way to run these institutions. And that's caused the shift in tuition. It's got to get out of the year-by-year knee-jerk reaction to something more predictable. So I agree with Rachel. Problem is, we only control a piece of this. We control our internal costs. The regions control tuition. And the third hand clapping that needs to come together is the state. And this three are not right now on a consistent economic fiscal model for the long term. And the students are getting buffeted around by that. It's not fair.
And what do you view your role to be in ensuring the state legislature plays its part in adequately funding the institutions?
Doing what we're doing here, getting the message out, getting the complexity of it out, making sure we understand the trade-offs that we're dealing with. Understand they've asked us to benchmark, make sure they understand where we are relative to those institutions. And then answering any questions they have at any time, including current politicians. I spend a fair amount of time with people running for office, and some may view that political. I view it as part of our job, which is to help inform them as to what's going on, what the facts are, to make sure they make better decisions. But at the end of the day, we are a republic. We're not a democracy. We elect as individuals the people to represent us in the state legislature and in the executive branch in the state. And at the end of the day, the people will decide based on who they elect, who to vest with this power. My job is to help the people in those positions have all the facts that they possibly need, and to make it very clear where I think the trade-offs are. And if, for example, if we don't find ways through this discussion fiscally, well, we probably can look pretty clearly at the last decade in terms of outcomes and see we're not going to change what we do. It's kind of likely we're going to continue the path that we've been on. I think that path's unacceptable. So If you have a better idea of what I should do, let me know. I wish I could make the decisions, but I don't.
So one area people look to as a potential solution for our funding situation is athletics contributing to academics. We've discussed that in previous interviews here, but in light of the announcement from Gary Barta recently that athletics is contributing several million to the university, can you expand on that and explain specifically what that money was used for and what that money will fund this year?
You know, so Gary and I started these conversations 2 years ago, and last year they contributed $2 million, as he said. This year it's another $2 million. And we've got a plan for it to go up from there. What it's specifically used for is I've left to the athletic department and left to the athletes to determine. So year by year they will make decisions based on what they think they should support. I think that's I think the more dictatorial I become on how that should get spent, the less they'll own it. And I want them to own this, and so I leave it to them. I'll let them announce it at the right time. I think it's the smart thing to do so that they don't say, oh, the president forced them to do it. No, 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 no. This is something they need to do because it's right for the program. And Gary I think, has announced some of those plans already, but I think you should anticipate the year by year. That'll change depending on different athletes with different senses of how to support campus.
Then, what specifically did the athletics money go toward last year then? Since I mean that is already
I'll let them
a
describe.
done deal.
They'll describe what they've supported. I know CAMBUS, I know student wellness and safety is another broad area that they're interested in. I think there's some discussions about the cultural houses, supporting of those. So we'll let them continue to own it. I don't want to preempt them.
Is there a point at which you would kind of intervene with the state funding situation?
What do you mean?
Being as what it is.
Intervene with whom?
Not intervene, but speak with them about potential areas that they should prioritize.
I'm sorry, who's them?
Athletics department, my bad.
No, I think if they can, yeah, as long as they're supporting, there's a rich set of activities on our campus, and if they're stepping up outside the athletic department to support anything that's non-athletic, it will help the rest of us. And so they can own that, and we can figure out how to move money from one pocket to the other. It's got to come out of athletics to supporting something they believe passionately about, and that's the only requirement.
Okay, switching gears a little bit, I think this is our last question. So with the shooting on the Penn Mall 2 weekends ago, a lot of talk on campus between students has been they're afraid to go downtown at night. And I know this is more of a question for the Iowa City Police Department on how they're handling the situation. But in terms of on campus, can you talk about what resources UI offers, and then if there's any talk about boosting those sources and for students just to feel safe coming here?
Yeah, campus safety is probably the most important issue we're currently dealing with, and the Penn Mall situation has exacerbated that. But it's been there well before that. Women's safety on campus, firearms in our society. Then you have an incident like 2 weekends ago in Penn Mall. What are we doing? Well, we have a set of resources. So we have a set of classes for various groups to learn how to better defend themselves and be more self-aware. We have a Guardian app. And by the way, if students aren't engaged in that, I'm not finding that we have a set of communication tools to let, in a sense, 911 type of help, so you can quickly push a button and let the university security and police organization know where you are and that you need help. So we have a set of mechanisms. We're looking at any more, and I say to anybody, if you're at another campus, you find something, night ride, a night ride just for women, now night ride for the entire campus. And then we're working very closely with the Iowa City Police Department, coordinating. I felt like a few years ago we were two different organizations, and there were different points of view. Now they're very tightly connected, collaborating, planning, running mock preparatory types of drills just to make sure we're ready. I hate to say this, but I don't think it will ever go away. It's just part of the life in the United States these days, maybe in the world. And so we just need to continue planning, coordinating, adding resources. This is another area that if you go back to our tuition, I don't want to put everything back into an economic bucket, but this is an area that it's not becoming cheaper. It's becoming more expensive for us to provide the safety across campus. Night ride going from just one part of our community now to all of our community really meant we had, I forgot, I think we added 2 more vehicles and drivers and all the rest. So, but we're not going to let the budget force us into not doing the right thing. We're going to do the right thing, and then we'll figure out the budget issues later. So, a journey, and it's. I think my best advice for students is get into some of the classes if you're personally so interested. Understand the Guardian apps, and then work as cohorts. Work. If you're alone late at night anywhere, that's for a guy or a gal. That's not smart. Go in groups and stay and help each other, and then stay coordinated.
Thank you.
Thank you.